Okay, welcome back to our talk about the RTO standards. We've moved forward now into standards 1.5 through to 1.8. And the first part of that standard talks about industry relevance. So it says in 1.5, the RTO's training and assessment practices are relevant to the needs of industry and are informed by industry engagement.
1.5 for me is that the training provider reflects industry needs and that industry had an influence on how the training has been planned and executed and feedback has been received. So there is an alignment with that the RTO isn't just going off in one direction, but is actually aligning itself to where is industry now, where's it going, and is the training provided relevant and up to date with what the industry needs.
And that's exactly what it is. And I think this actually boils down a lot of what vet training is all about. If you listen to what the government talks about quite regularly, it's always about meeting the needs, the training needs of the workforce.
Yeah.
So that really boils it down.
So in a practical sense, what are some ways here at Spec Training that we like to engage industry? How do we make a note of that? Who are the kinds of people that we talk to? Not necessarily naming specific clients, but what kind of procedures do we have in place to make sure that our stuff is industry engaged, so to speak?
It's a great question because it's threefold. So there's three components to it. Firstly, we're in an unusual position because we're teaching trainers and trainers across all industries. So therefore, we're not trying to train trainers for specific industries. We're just trying to give them the skill set that they can use that's transferable. So the way we originally designed our training and assessment strategy was exactly that. We thought, okay, this is a generic strategy. Therefore, we're going to choose these core and elective subjects. Why? Because that's how it feeds into each other. Not that there's many electives to choose from for the TAE, but definitely with the diplomas. And then we looked at also the assessments themselves. So the way we've designed our assessments from the TAS is that we use units of competency from the TAE to do the assessments, the validations on. Why should we do that? Well, it highlights the importance of the principles of assessment and rules of evidence, which we're going to cover in a second. It's something the student is expected to know and have some sort of industry currency in it, even just by doing the course. So if we just pulled out and we do use a business unit and a health unit as well in the assessments, but again, we've chosen two very generic units, a communication one, or I think it's customer service, and the other one is the first aid qualification. The reason, again, very generic across the board. Most people, a bit like work health and safety, will have some exposure to those things, whether they've done it before or it's just an easier assessment template to work through. So that's the first fold, would you believe? The second part is who do we engage in industry? Yeah. So our industry is TAE, vet. So therefore we have to engage well-respected and high-quality people from the industry. That includes competitors. So we've had, in the most recent TAS review, which was only last month, we sent it out to someone we are familiar with who works as a consultant, but we also sent it out to somebody who I've known for many, many years, but is a direct competitor of ours, especially in the resources part of things. But that's kind of how the community works. You know, we all want to make sure everyone's doing the right thing. So she was great and responded really well with a lot of good input into the TAS. And in the past, we've also engaged a full-on competitor here on the Gold Coast who trains TAE, and she and us, again, work together really well. So yeah, that's how we engage industry. That's for developing the TAS and the training assessment, which is what this is really talking about. We make sure it's relevant to industry. The third part of that is then just our own research. So how do we do that? And it's a bit like PD for a trainer. You go to conferences, you listen to people like Iteca and Velg, and you look at the discussions on LinkedIn from RTO consultants. You look at all the things that are causing the industry a little bit of pain here and there. You know, what do we do about it? And when you put all those things together, you're almost continually improving. I know we're supposed to anyway, but we're almost continually improving the products, the way we engage, and so on. And most recently, and we're still ironing out the finer details, but we've engaged with the University of Queensland to then say, okay, well, how about quality in training? So from an external body who's really interested in learning, and by that I mean not themselves, but they're interested in the topic of learning and cognitive psychology, and we're going to hopefully have their help in doing research with us to come up with some metrics around what is quality training as well. So we've really spread ourselves across the whole gamut of the vet industry to make sure we are industry relevant.
Fantastic.
So I'll ask you now, how about those industries who aren't like us, the ones who are directly maybe providing training to hairdressers or beauticians or steel fabrication, things like that? How do they keep up to date?
In one of my previous roles, I actually worked at a paramedic college, and that college was in a unique position that it was actually training students in the diploma of paramedicine. So its industry essentially was the future work of working as a state paramedic, which was great. So any of the TASs that were developed were then taken to the state paramedic associations, and they were asked for feedback on those TASs. Then also getting feedback from them on the equipment that was being used as part of the training, also the assessments, were they realistic, were they not? And as it got closer to audit, realised the importance of documenting those interactions, because a lot of those interactions can be very informal, and we may flick off an email here and there, but we may not think about actually recording that as a piece of evidence. And so creating a industry engagement log was really important for that organisation and for every organisation, just to keep a note of any and every time you do speak to industry. And I think one of the things that it highlights in the user guide for the standards, which is a great document to look into, it mentions in that document that just getting one of your trainers to sign something off is not really considered industry engagement, so to speak. So other industries, you look at car manufacturing or automotive or different things like that. If you're teaching automotive, well, you want to be speaking to the dealers regularly. You want to be going meeting with them face to face and recording those conversations that you have, sending emails back and forth. That's all industry engagement, and making sure that whatever you're teaching is up to date, and also then following up. If you have trained up an apprentice and they've gone to a shop and started working there, well, then calling them up and saying, how was that apprentice's performance? Did they actually meet the requirements of what is required for the job? And so all of that stuff, so to speak, that we would often consider informal, can actually form a huge part of industry engagement.
Oh, I completely agree. And I failed to mention that, but you're right. The recording of it is incredibly important. One other thing I would like to bring to the table, and it's kind of discussed in 1.6, so I'll quickly read that and then we'll just finish off on industry relevance. It says the RTO implements a range of strategies for industry engagement, and systematically uses the outcome of that industry engagement to ensure the industry relevance of their training assessment strategies and practices, and be the currency of their trainers and assessors. So we've kind of talked about the things we can do there, but the other thing that came to mind as you were talking about that was when we do have larger clients, and we're fortunate enough to have some very regular large clients, we do consult with them because training for them is slightly different.
Yes.
So they need it delivered in a slightly different way, and we might call it contextualization, but we should be writing a learning program for those people. When I say should be, we are writing a learning program for those people and training plans for those individual students, depending on how they're going to go through the training. So that's another form of recording your industry consultation. So if you're fortunate enough to have a big client, like let's say you're feeding into a large industry body. I don't want to get too specific, and so I'm trying to avoid it, but let's say you're doing work health and safety and you're feeding a lot of people into Rio Tinto, for instance, then you are going to be obviously consulting with Rio Tinto to make sure that the training is of standard, it's relevant, and that's when the good old range statement used to come into play, is to make sure you could fiddle with that, but that no longer applies. So you just got to contextualize it to make sure it fits them, and then, as you said, record it.
Yes,
so that's great. That's really good information. The next one is learner support. 1.7 says the RTO determines the support needs of individual learners and provides access to educational and support services necessary for that individual to meet the requirements of the training product as specified in the VET package. So individual learners, I mean, that to me is what we do on a day-to-day basis. If we're not bending over backwards to try and fit a student's schedule, to fit a student's needs, we're not doing our job. So we kind of do it culturally anyway here, but if I was a new RTO, how would I apply that? What sort of things could I put in place, do you reckon?
It's a huge can of worms. And I think Asqua did an amazing video on this exact topic, which was in the Spotlight series. And they really talked about the nuts and bolts of it. I think it all comes under the heading of what is reasonable. Because as you are running a course, there's going to be certain expectations that a student would need to meet in order to successfully travel through the course. Then any gaps and deficiencies need to be supported, so to speak. It ties back to an earlier conversation we've had around digital literacy. So what is going to be the required survival skills to get through? What deficiencies may exist, and how far would the RTO be willing to support? And then having frank and open conversations with potential enrollees saying, okay, we can offer this level of support. Would this be sufficient? And being able to navigate that conversation in a way that the learner themselves makes a decision whether to enroll or not enroll based on what's available. And I think whenever ASQA is auditing an RTO, they're looking to see, is that support being made known to the student?
Is it systemic?
Yes.
So it used to be a thing many, many years ago that, do you have a student handbook? That was like their guide to everything. But that's not. Now, you've got to have other evidence. So you've got to have systems in place. What do you do when a student comes to you and says, I've got a digital literacy issue?
Yes.
At the last minute. Oh, okay, what can we do? And nowhere in here does it say reasonable.
Yes.
Right? So a very forthright auditor could come to you and say, it says educational support services necessary for the individual to meet that requirements. Why haven't you done that? And you've got to go, well, that student, something went wrong. So it is an interesting one from a legal or standards point of view. But systemically, if you've got all those things in place, then number one, you should pick up on the issue before they start. That would be the biggest thing. And two, what the services have to come to a standard that would be, I think, would be reasonable, as you said. So, I think that would cover it. Without getting too much into it.
I think from personal experience, as long as there's a learner support statement that exists as part of enrollment and as part of ongoing support, and then you've got evidence to show where that policy procedure has actually been followed in a number of different cases, then you're covering yourself. I'm so tempted to share one of ours, but I can imagine the comments. But one of our, I'm going to say it. One of ours is when we very first contact students, we tell them they can contact us 24/7, 7 days a week, and we have a response policy of 2 days. That's just response. And the only reason we say 2 days is because weekends. But it would be 1 day normally, and usually it's within the same day. And that is for any issue, from training to assessment to family issues to whatever they have a problem with that's going to affect their training and their outcomes. And we would have hundreds and hundreds of emails from yourself, from all our trainers, from our support staff, getting back to them, trying, so we've got no problem with that. And that's kind of that statement out there. And that's why I'm saying we might get some comments, because that's a pretty broad promise to make. But I'll say, fortunately, we're small enough to do that. Large organizations like TAFE have to have a completely separate data-driven support system in place. Great. They've got really good, that they pick up on students who are having any sort of issues through all these different metrics, and then they know, okay, this person needs to be contacted. On a trainer level, I think one interesting thing about this is that a lot of support may exist, but students need to be right-minded it actually exists. And I think there could be a lot of how-to videos or a lot of different things out there that sometimes students need to be prompted because it just isn't top of mind. So do want to definitely encourage all RTOs to have a reminder policy or a kind of reminder campaign to let students know of what else they offer, so that students are taking full advantage of whatever the RTO has available.
I'm just conscious of time, because I do want to cover this last part, which is assessment 1.8. And this is where the principles of assessment and rules of evidence are lodged into regulations, and therefore become quasi-law. We have to follow them. And I love it. These are my favourite things. That's why I wrote the assessment chapters of the textbook. I actually have a huge belief in these. So the RTO implements an assessment system that ensures that assessing, including recognition of prior learning, A, complies with the assessment requirements of the relevant training package, absolutely, and B, is conducted in accordance with the principles and rules. Of course, I've shortened that. So the principles and rules are in there. You can't miss them. And I'll put that on the screen, obviously, but we teach this in our program. It's second nature to us, but we have to remember that this is the RTO standards. We just happen to be very familiar with them because we teach it. But there's RTOs out there that don't. They will be teaching first aid. So principles of assessment. I remember doing that in my course. So in your mind, how does the average RTO, so not a TAE-based RTO, but how does the average RTO remember these principles and rules so that every time they do a validation, every time they're writing a new assessment or assessing someone, this is top of mind?
Great question. I think it comes back to uniformed understanding. And so when I am looking at the principles of assessment, I give it a subheading of what is a good assessment. And I know that there are quite in-depth definitions out there in textbooks and in the standards and all those kind of things. I like to break it down really, really, really simply. Valid, does it actually match the unit? Flexible, does it allow for RPL? Does it allow for different ways of being assessed? And does it allow for different modes of assessment? Reliable. Would all assessors use it the same way? And essentially, are the instructions clear enough? Is there any ambiguity? Yes or no? And then we've got fairness, which in my mind comes back to discrimination and reasonable adjustment. So that's pretty much a summary of them. So in a validation session, if everybody has that agreed understanding and you can write those on a whiteboard and just go, all right, is this assessment tool meeting that criteria, and really getting a frank agreed definition of each of those. Because I think a lot of times in my experience, fairness and flexibility have often overlapped and validity and reliability have often overlapped. Well, no, let's just get a clear cut, exact definition of what each of those are. Let's agree on all of that, and then we'll go from there. And then when we come to the rules of evidence, which is essentially what is a good answer? What is a good answer? And a good answer is correct. It is the student's own work. It is up to date, and it's long enough. That's pretty much it. Okay.
How dare you make it so simple?
Yes. And so when I have trained other assessors in the past, I've said, all right, when you're looking at this answer, is it correct? Can you prove it's its own work? Is it long enough? And is it up to date? And if it meets all those 4 boxes, then the answer is satisfactory. Great. And I think a great thing for any RTO manager to do is create an assessor marking guide in the respect of how to actually assess and what are, make sure that those rules of evidence are actually part of the vernacular of the RTO and part of the assessor's language that they use back to other trainers and also other students as well, and saying, yes, your answer is satisfactory because these things, or not satisfactory because it doesn't meet one of these rules of evidence, and actually have that conversation. Because I don't really like the fact that so many students have gone through TAE courses or even diploma of TAE courses and they don't have a working knowledge of the rules of evidence or the principles of assessment. And I think that's just very sad, to be honest.
Well, whenever anybody ever asks for an RPL with regards to the TAE, the very first thing I ask them is, what are the principles of assessment, rules of evidence? If they don't know that, I usually, okay, time to enroll in the course. Because that should be the one thing you really do remember from the course. Because training styles changed, training modes change, as we know. Designing stuff, you may not be involved in that. So I think really for all trainers and assessors, that's the one thing that combines them.
Yes.
And so that's why I really push on that. Now that's 1.8. We're not going to go into 1.9 today, but we are going to cover that probably through to the end of, we're going to cover that through to the end of this part of the standards next, because this is now going to go into the trainers themselves and what they need. And I think that requires its own little podcast. So we're going to do that. But look, thanks, Mark. I think for anyone watching out there, I hope you did really take away some of the simplicity that's in the standards, but also how you really need to apply it on a day-to-day basis. It's not something you should think about once a year when you're doing a validation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks very much, mate.
You're welcome.